It is page 944 that I'll look at, because there's, once again, a lot going on in this gospel reading. And actually, one of the reasons I got so excited about looking through this a little bit more in depth with you is because this is the first time I've gotten to preach this with you in my 7 years, 10 months here at Faith. I've never gotten to go through this gospel lesson with you today. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit more in depth because there's tons going on in it. And you don't just see one theme running through it, you see three, or at least I see three. So I want to talk today about what three things we see in here and what they mean for us today. The very first theme that we're going to see in this text is that Jesus goes where no one else wants to go. All right, that's the first one. Jesus is going where no one else wants to go. 944 if you're still looking. 944. So 1, Jesus goes where no one else wants to go. 2, Jesus is waging a much larger battle than can be seen here. All right? And number 3, ultimately, Jesus is dealing us back into the game. Those are the three things that I see going on in this text today that we're going to talk about. All right, so let's get to the first theme. Jesus goes where no one else wants to go. And there are a couple of clues in here that tell us that this is a place where Jesus is going that no one else wants to go. And the very first clue is location. So look at that first line. Notice the first sentence on verse 26. I love this. Then they arrived in the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. All right? That word opposite is really important here. This is in no small way saying those other people, right? Gerasene is filled with Gentiles. Galilee, where everybody is from on that boat, is filled with Jews. So you have Galilee where all the Jews are, and Gerasene is filled with other people opposite us. Now, this might not sound like anything very serious, but this is well before Paul is saying things like there is no difference between Jews and Greeks. This is well before Gentiles were brought into the fold of Abraham's family. So this is a pretty big deal that they're going to a land opposite of Galilee. And as if location is not enough to tell us that Jesus is headed somewhere where no one else wants to go, no self-respecting Jew would want to go, this place is filled with something that Jews shouldn't be around. Did you see it? Swine. It's filled with pigs. That's a problem for Jews. Not only is this place filled with Gentiles, that is anyone who's not a Jew, but it's filled with filthy animals. It is no place for us who are clean, God-fearing people to go. And so, when the disciples pull up to the shore in the land opposite Galilee, see all these swine, our last clue that they don't want Jesus to be here, and this is a place where no one else wants to go, comes right up on, I think, verse 27. And Jesus stepped out on the land. Notice what happens, or it doesn't happen. No one else gets out of the boat. All the disciples stay in the boat. And Jesus gets out in this foreign, swine-filled place with no friends to back him up. This is a place where no one wants to go, and yet Jesus does. And that should not surprise us. Jesus continually and constantly goes where no one else wants to go, to include the cross for our sake, which is ultimately what is going to finally move our hearts to say, okay, if Jesus is willing to go to places that no one else wants to go, maybe that's what we should do too. Because that is where the hurting people are. That is where the possessed people are. That is where the broken people are. It's where people who need to hear about Jesus are. And I was thinking about that on our mission trip this weekend, or this past week. I'm positive, well, we have Habitat for Humanity here, and I'm positive we have food banks here in this area. So why do we send the kids farther away? Well, there is just something about traveling from where you feel safe to a place where you have never been to do things that are difficult for people to do there. And when we do it, and when we push our young people to do it, we are embodying what Jesus does on the cross for us, and we are embodying what he tells us to do in this text. All right, so that's theme 1. Theme number 2, Jesus is waging a much larger battle than what we see here. But first, I want to tell you a story. All right, so my Uncle Wes is an engineer, and back in the 80s, he spent a lot of time in India building projects there. And so the very first time he got to India and he had to see his accommodations, they were kind of rugged. It's just like a little room, and it had a door, but the windows just had cloth coverings on them. And so he gets into this room, and he's setting up his stuff. You know, he's putting his clothes away, and he's arranging things, and he goes to open up the closet, and there right in front of it is this giant lizard. Kind of freaks him out, so he shoos it out the door. Finishes what he's doing, cleans everything else up, starts work the next day. And things go great at the building site. Project's moving along smoothly, everything's working out perfectly, and his accommodations, they're good, they're fine. They're not great, it's kind of hot, but they're fine. Except for a couple days in, he's starting to notice bugs. And at night, he's starting to get bit. And pretty soon, he's starting to see bugs everywhere. So he goes to the landlord of this room and he says, it's fine, but I'm kind of having a bug problem. And the landlord says, "We're big lizard." Turns out, this lizard was waging a battle that Wes had no idea. He was intentionally supposed to be in there. So he said, "Open your door." The lizard comes walking back in. I mean, he had been outside waiting, I guess, to get back in the room and get to work. But that is exactly what's going on with our text today. There is this obvious battle going on, right? There is this poor, demon-possessed man who needs help. And Jesus is absolutely going to give it to him. But Jesus is also up to so much more. And again, there's just these little nuggets in the text that kind of tells us that there is a bigger battle going on here. You'll see that the demon is the only one in the text who actually knows who Jesus is. Did you notice that? On verse 28. When the man saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High?" Jesus has stepped out of a boat. He's got no entourage behind him to tell anybody that this is this guy from Galilee that everybody's been talking about. And yet this demon knows who Jesus is. No one else in Gerasene might know who Jesus is, but this demon does. And what that tells us is that Jesus is fighting a cosmic battle, and they know he's here. He's fighting an unseen darkness that is at work in this world, and it is terrified of him, and it knows him by name. And the second clue that Jesus is fighting a larger battle that we don't necessarily see is the name of the demon that Jesus is fighting. Did you notice that? What is the name of the demon? Legion, right? As in Roman legion. As in a huge, unpenetrable force. And to folks hearing this in this time frame, the idea of one man taking on an entire Roman legion is ridiculous, suicidal. And yet, once again, Jesus does it. And he does it by healing one man. And just yesterday, I was reading in the USA Today that since 2017, there has been a 6% drop among adults who believe in God. It tells me that there is still a bigger battle going on around us, playing out in cosmic ways. But this text also tells me that we have a role in that Jesus has a role in that through us. This text tells us, I believe, in this one thematic lesson, that one person at a time, one follower of Jesus at a time, can push back a whole lot of darkness. All right, last theme. So, as much as this text is about going where no one else wants to go, and about the larger battle that we are engaged in for the sake of Jesus, this text is ultimately about one life, one set of issues, one heart, one person. And Jesus is dealing that one person back into the game. So, next week, my entire Wassell family, all 45 of us, mobbish, hobbit-looking people, we're all going to Kentucky Lake for our annual family vacation. There's going to be fishing and swimming and boating and a lot of eating and just wonderful fellowship. But above all things, when we Wassells get together, the one thing we love to do is to play cards, specifically a game called Hand and Foot. And I am told that this is, I've described it to people, and I'm told it seems like a cross between canasta and rummy. And you play it with 5 decks, and there's room for 4 people. And here's where it gets kind of cutthroat. Once you hear a hand and foot game is going on, you run to that cabin, and you try to get one of those 4 seats. And inevitably, someone is going to get left out, right? But in my family, you don't deal with rejection real well. So you become what's known as a hang-around. A hang-around is someone who sits along on the outside of the hand and foot game, just waiting for something bad to happen to someone on the inside. Maybe one of their kids starts crying outside because maybe you poked them. Maybe their oven mysteriously got turned to 500 and their casserole's burning. I don't know. I'm not saying those things have happened, but I just know when you're a hang-around, you hope those things happen because it is no fun to be on the outside looking in. It is a lonely life being a hang-around dealt outside of the game. And that is today exactly what is happening to this poor, possessed man. This is probably the saddest portrait of a human painted in the Gospels. I mean, you got to look at that parenthetical on verse 29. Many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles. But he would break the bonds and be driven even further into the wilderness by this demon. Isolated, alone, and afraid, incoherent, chained to tombs outside of a city, starved for physical, spiritual nourishment. Isolated, alone, and afraid. It is as dire as it gets, completely dealt out of life. And now I think we can get caught up in this really terrible description and this really desperate scene and think, well, this really doesn't have a whole lot to do with me, and I really can't relate, and there's not too many people I know in this desperate of a situation. So this is just a great story, but it doesn't really apply. So let me just get it a little closer to reality. I had a very, very good friend. I have a very good friend, Nate Foster. We served over in Spangdahlem, Germany with him for a couple years. And now he is a police officer in Yakima, out in Washington State. And 10 years ago, he had an arrest go really bad, really bad. People got hurt. He was one of them. His knee specifically got hurt, and he had to have surgery. And it was a bad deal. And so after surgery, on top of the physical pain, Nate was just kind of emotionally troubled by the whole thing. And the pills that he got after the surgery to help the physical pain in his knee were ones that he started to use to kind of deal with this traumatic stress he had going on. And pretty soon, Nate wasn't getting out of bed and going to work anymore. So, a lot of us knew about it, and we were texting him, let's get you into counseling. I was talking to him about, I'm praying for you. I've got you on my church prayer list. And all of us were doing things that we thought would help. But his grandpa, who was like 85 years old at the time, and still fishing and hunting in the same woods around Yakima that he took Nate to fish and hunt in when he was a little boy, showed up at Nate's door. And he knocked and he said, "All right, Nate, get out of bed. We're going fishing." So Nate went, and when they got home that night, he said his grandpa walked in, grabbed all the prescription bottles he could find in the house, put them in a sack, and said, "Nate, I'll bring these back in the morning when I pick you up for fishing." Walked out the door. This is a grizzled old World War II vet. Nate didn't say nothing. He just let him leave. And the next morning, his grandpa shows up, and they go out fishing. And this continues to happen, and every night he takes this sack home and says, "I'll bring it back to you in the morning." And this goes on until finally Nate put his badge back on, and he went to work instead of fishing. All that stuff we were trying to do, that helps, and I think we need it, but what his grandfather ultimately did was he dealt him back into the game. Every single day, he dealt him a hand of cards to get him to play the game again, get back in it. And when Jesus heals this man, do you notice, if you still got your Bibles open, do you notice the last thing that man wants to do is go with Jesus? To go where he knows it's going to be good. And what do you see happen? Jesus tells him, "Go back home. Go back home to the life you had lost. Go back to the people who are there waiting. Go back to the people who still need to know my name. Go back to the people who are lost themselves. Go back to where you are needed." Jesus dealt him back into the game where he was needed most. In church, there are brothers and sisters. There are brothers and sisters all around us in this place, places that we don't want to go, in hospital rooms, in emotional turmoil, in financial straits, and we can be tempted to just want to go on with our summers. And we should. We should enjoy the life that God has blessed us with. We should move and do the things that we get to do that are life-giving for ourselves. But as we do that, as we acknowledge our own blessing, Jesus is also asking us in this text not to forget to deal those folks back in, who are in those dark places, who are fighting those larger battles that we might not be seeing, to avail ourselves to those around us who are hurting and isolated and in need of our light and love and support and prayers. Thanks be to God for this work that we are called to. Let's get about it. Amen.